Welcome to the Tanz im August podcast. This podcast series is part of the Tanz im August festival, presented by Hau Hebel am Ufer. This year it takes place from the 9th to 26th of August in 11 locations in Berlin. Several artists from this year's program have been invited to participate in a conversation. Each episode seeks to offer insights into their creative process, uncovering what's behind the decisions they made and the knowledge they gained along the way. The artists tell listeners about their current and past projects, revealing detailed information about the work that will be presented during Tanz im August. In this episode, Ricardo Carmona, artistic director of the festival, talks with Radouan Mriziga. He will present his new work Libya on 16th and 17th of August in Sophiensaelen.
So, hello, Radouan. Thank you for joining us in this interview and this episode of the podcast. I think I will ask you first to introduce yourself.
Thank you, Ricardo, and I'm happy to be with you in this podcast. I'm Radouan Mriziga. I'm a Moroccan choreographer and dancer based in Brussels, and working from Brussels.
Okay. So the piece that you're going to present in Tanz in August is called Libya. That I think the majority of the people will think about the country that's called Libya. But I will ask you also to tell us a bit more, why do you choose this title and what is the relation with the piece?
So, yes, I think there is a lot of reasons why I choose the title. But the first reason, of course, its name was given by the Egyptians to my people, the Amazigh, indigenous people from North Africa. And it was one of the first description of these people from another gaze, which is the Egyptian one. So they were calling the whole region Libyans. And then for the piece, I wanted to start from that point to also because Libya, it's a choreography that tries to repair the story or history or memories from North Africa, specifically from Amazigh perspective. So I wanted to start from a far point in how the link that Amazigh had with other civilization, and then that was the first description. So I used Libya as a reference to that point in time. Yeah, and of course, Libya is also the country now, which is for us, it's also a place where there is a lot of history. Still, we are not very knowledgeable about. And I think part of me wanted also to revisit our people from this country, Amazigh people. I called Libya because it have all these connotations at once.
And I mean, you spoke about the Amazigh culture, but maybe some of the listeners, they are not so familiar with this term. Can you explain a bit more about this culture and exactly what you mean by that?
So Amazigh, I'm an Amazigh person, and Amazigh people are simply the indigenous people of North Africa, from Siwa in Egypt to Canary Islands, and from the Mediterranean up to part of Mali and part of Niger and even Chad, sub-Saharan Africa. And we call ourselves Amazigh, but we are different tribes and different language tribes, if we could say. And these are people that inhabit the desert, inhabit the mountains and the cities in North Africa, but also inhabit the coast of the Mediterranean, but also the Atlantic.
Yeah, thank you. Some of the aspects of this work that you developed are connected to songs, oral history, and dance. How do you integrate all these elements in the piece, in the choreography?
So I think the whole work from the trilogy, it was a part of this work before Libya, the big question was, for me, it was like how to deal with history and how to imagine history, repair history, retalk about history. But also history does not mean only with an imperial reading of a very linear way of the history is past. I think for me, history is also now and it's also the future. So how to not be exclusive of stories and memories in this region. And since Amazigh or our people, they are an oral culture, so there is a lot of our stories and histories are in our collective memory, but also in our songs and in our dances and in our costumes or dresses, in our food, in our language. So for me, it was necessary to not try to do a representation of the history or to remake just another narratives, but to go deep in the question of how actually we can experience this. So for me, the first answer was it's to do it how my people always did it, but in a choreographic way, which is to use the songs, the language, the dances, the togetherness as well, and the poems. So the piece it's full of all of this, and it deals with the question of history in this way.
I mean, you just mentioned that this works follows trilogy. So it's 3 works that you created for 3 different choreographers and dancers. The first one is Tafurk. Second is Ayur, that was presented in Tanz in August in 2021. And Akal. How did you work with these previous works and how they were embedded or part of the creation for Libya?
So actually, it's through this work I came to do Libya. I wanted to, as I said, I wanted to deal with this question of history in a very poetical way. So it's a kind of mix between political and poetic. I wanted to start from a place that is very deep in time, but at the same time, that holds space for speculation, for fabulation, for rewriting exactly, but more imagining what was happening and what's gonna be and where we are. So I started this trilogy from a point of time of our tribes and people when they were a matriarchy. And I started specifically from an epistemology, or we can call it also mythology, of needs, traveling from Libya, the Lake Tritonid, to Egypt and to Tunis and then to Athena. So the trilogy is it's this travel of the epistemology from south of Libya to Athens. So then, of course, this brings Libya already as a space, this dream, and also brings this moment in history inside the creation of Libya. So when I finished the trilogy, I wanted also to include other parts of the history and also to include other ways of talking or choreographing this history. I invited the 3 artists with who I did the trilogy, and then I also invited other performers to be with us. So we are 9 people. And of course, in Libya as well, dramaturgically, the work itself, it starts from this trilogy. I think when people will see the performance, there is a clear moment of this start with the 3 performers, Dorothee, Sundus, and Maite.
But did you integrate the choreographic material that you developed for the solos in Libya, or you created something new from scratch?
We actually did 2. There is different materials in Libya. One of the materials is part of the materials from the trilogy, Tafuk, the Ayur, and Akal. And then part of the materials are from these pictures from rock painting in south of Algeria, Tassili. It's a place where our ancestors left for us. A lot of rock paintings with them dancing and also doing other things. So a lot of the material is also based on these rock paintings. And then other part of the material is based on traditional dances, also dances that we share together, because most of the people or all of the people in Libya are North Africans, besides Maite, that she's half Korean, half French, and then Dorothée, she's from Rwanda. But we share as well certain dances and rhythms. So the material were divided in these three, like there is the trilogy, there is the rock painting, and there is the our dances that inspired us. I would not say we reproduced them, but they inspired our creation of movement.
You spoke already several times about notion of togetherness and being together and creating something together. Can you expand a bit more on that and how this is important for your work and especially for Libya?
So the question of being together is also, I mean, Amazigh as a concept now for me is also, it's a political statement that call for unifying this region, and also which means unifying the people, but also the lands, the mountain, the sea, and the desert, and also, of course, again, because this is a very big part of my work, the question of knowledge, and then how then we bring again these knowledges of our ancestors, but also the knowledges that they shared with other civilizations in the Mediterranean and sub-Saharan Africa, but also the Middle East and further. So for me, Libya is also this space where it's also a call for this first togetherness in revisiting knowledge and re-questioning the hierarchies of knowledge and celebrating this togetherness and putting a clear political statement against the borders between us, against these political tensions in the region as well. So that's one part. The other part, of course, is itself because big part now of Amazigh culture happens literally in the togetherness. It's when we celebrate something, or when we grieve something, or when we are angry or we are happy. So then you see the manifestations of this identity and this culture. So for me, it was natural as well to try to find the same motor of creation and to look for this togetherness with the people I work with, but also to try to create it with the audience if it's possible, of course. It's an inclusive space. So this from where this call of togetherness comes, also because I think in my other works there was always this question of how the space of performance can be a collective space, or a collective space where we imagine things together, or where we experience space together, or we experience now, in this case, history and present and future together.
Yeah, I think this is totally also what we experience when we see a dance show in a theater. Is really this share experience that the public has with the performance. Yeah. I have the impression that music really plays a very important role in the creation of your last works, but also for Libya. How did you approach the musical aspect of the creation?
Mm-hmm. So, I mean, in the last trilogy, I was lucky to meet also great people who deal with sound and music and songs specifically, and rap, rhythm. So in my work in general, I would say the base of my dramaturgy is rhythm. It's a point where a lot of part of the work makes sense to me when I build it. But in Ayur, for example, I met with Mehdi Shemas, who is a rapper from Tunis. I invited him to come and to write for us. Him and Lilia, she's a poet. So really here you can feel that there is a musicality and there is music, there is a rhythm, a specific one. And then in Tafukt with Maite, we worked a lot on making songs. We invited also a rapper from Tunis, puppeteers, to write for us a song. And then we also invited at that time Dorothée to write for us a song. And then, of course, me, myself, I enjoy composing rhythm and songs with the people I invite to work. And then with Dorothée, of course, also Dorothée, she has a lot of music knowledge and she's a singer. So the whole piece was based on songs, actually, and poems and writing songs together, writing melodies, writing rhythms. So all of this also came to Libya. So from poems or texts to poems to rap to songs. And as a line of connection, it's my curiosity and love to compose with rhythm and with sounds. But also in Libya specifically, I used music recording, which is in general, it's very minimal in my work, the presence of music. So I worked with two specific musics. One, it's from Libya, from Amazigh-Tuareg from Libya. And a big music, it's what we call in Morocco Andalusian music, but it's actually North African music that was created in this meeting between North Africa and South of Europe, specifically Andalusia and the Iberian Peninsula, because of course of these three spaces that are very important for me in this trilogy, but also they're gonna be very important in my coming work with the desert, the mountain, and the sea. So each of the musics also links to this, to one of these spaces, and each of the use of rhythm and songs and the music relate to these spaces.
For in the credits of Libya, and also because you mentioned several times the use of poems, in the credits of Libya, you write there's a poem contribution by the poet Asma Jama. Is there a connection between the two of you, or how did this poem and writer came into the piece?
Yeah, I think in general in my work, I like meeting people, and it's really intuitively I ask people to do things for the work, and it's really by intuition. But Asma, she was part of a performance that I saw of Dorothée, and I heard also from Dorothée her writing. And then when we met, we just keep talking, and I found that she's the right person to write first for Akal, because the poem that she made it for Akal, and it's a poem that you can say the title or talk was a lot about a prophecy, because in Akal the piece was divided in the name of the daylight, and then the last part of the day is the dawn, or like the names of it's a new day. And they asked Asma to write for it a prophecy because it's a new day. And this new day, of course, goes to Libya. I mean, in my dramaturgy between the trilogy and Libya, so the new day it's also Libya. And then we used part of this poem in the end of Akal, and then another part of it in Libya. So this is how it came the work with Asma.
And we've been speaking a lot about poems, and in general, this is a more general question I would like to ask is how important poetry and literature is for your work.
Yeah, I think it's becoming more and more taking a lot of space in my work. I think first because of my reconnection to my ancestral knowledge, if we can say, the oral traditions in North Africa, but also in the Middle East. And also I have part of my Arabic culture. I am Amazigh, but I am also culturally Arab. And the poetry, the language, the words and the poetry, it's a very important element in these cultures, in the Amazigh, but also in Arab cultures. So I think also I grew up with what we call Arsalan, which is it's practicing poetry in Amazigh countrysides, and our people are very proud with that because they also compete with these poems. And I think for me it was always there, but I was never really when you have something really you are living in it, sometimes you don't see it because you are completely inside it. And then I think with time, being also far from the land for a very long time, maybe getting older, so I have more and more feeling of belonging to this land, but also belonging to this knowledge, and also a will to dive deeper in it, and also question my way of doing things, and then question it through this perspective. So the poems and the text in general, the language becomes something more and more important in my last works. It's really a mix of the different things. So also, I am fan of rap music, and then it was there as well forever since I remember. But then I made this work with these teenagers, this group of teenagers in Belgium around rap music, and I think that also this connection with the future generation at that time made me also think of the language, the importance of language in a way to communicate. Of course, I don't put the hierarchy of language as very important as the only way to share knowledge or to communicate, but I suddenly also realized, okay, actually there is part of my audience and there is part of people with who I want to talk. They have an easier or more complex relation to language. And then it becomes also a question in my work, how the language, how the text, how this way or this knowledge can be present in my work, since the whole work is a question of hierarchies of knowledge. So this is how the poems becomes more and more present, text in general, and also I would say the question of how to use language.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. I mean, in the beginning of our talk, you spoke about this desire of attempt to create a non-imperial history. Can you explain a bit better that notion, or how do you work with history in general also?
So I think here in these days in Australia, in this very beautiful context where a lot of talk about indigenous dramaturgy or way of writing your own work, but from an indigenous perspective, but also from a Black indigenous person of color perspective, and how to write your work, how also, because of course we live in a very westernized field system, very Eurocentric. And then, of course, the questions are always what to do. Do you really go against it? To who you want to present your work? How you want to do it? And it's a whole complex question. And you can imagine here in Australia, also these questions are super strong, and also people have very interesting ways of dealing with this. So for me, I was talking today with one of the artists, and I was thinking, yes, I think the question of history, of course, there is the very Western academic way of talking of history, and then putting things in archives, and then excluding parts, and then choosing what part is relevant, what is not relevant. And that's, of course, translate in the education, translate in how we relate with this knowledge of history, and also automatically translate of how we see people, how we deal with knowledge, to who we give the space to speak, and we listen to who. So all these questions, of course, I have them. And for me, that was not the way I want to talk about our history. Because, of course, there is our people, Amazigh people, or indigenous, or Black, or brown, or people of color who do this work through that perspective. And of course, it interests me, and I listen to it, and it's also knowledge, and I look at it. But as we were talking about today again, like, for me, it's interesting to listen to all the voices and to look at all the ways of how we deal with these questions. And for example, the question of history, how the academics do, but also how other people who keep just stories, or people who keep it in a song, or people who just want to memorize things, but they don't want to talk even about it. They want to dance it or to make a craft out of it. So for me, it was the way I wanted to talk about this and to bring this question. It have to be as complex as time in itself. This past and future and present, it's so complex, and we cannot just look at it from an imperial perspective and say the past happened and that's it, and now we are in a present and we have to just deal with what is now, and then let's hope for a better future. I think for me it's very simplistic, and my presence is so linked to the past, and then the future will be so linked to now, and it's quite circular, or where you can say like it have all the direction. There is no a linear direction from past to future. So for me, it was the work itself. It have to be also like this, or at least I want to try that the space of choreography or of performance can allow this unlinearity, and also can allow a question of these hierarchies, and can give space to experience these times through other elements than just what is written, archived, and agreed about that the correct and other things are wrong. So for me, Libya is also an attempt to bring all this question. And of course, it's just the start of work. As you know, Ricardo, in general, my work is a long series of different, the same research, but different works. So also Libya is just one of the moments that I allow myself to share with the audience, but then the work will continue, of course.
Yeah, we hope so, that you continue. Do you see dance and movement as a knowledge? Because you also spoke a lot about hierarchical aspects of knowledge.
Yeah, I mean, of course, for me, that was the whole start of the question when I did 55 the first time. I think the first question, I mean, after finishing studying dance for a very long time, the first very basic question, and even we can say naive question for me at that time, which is not naive because it allows all of this. It was the question of knowledge, like dance, what is dance, how it's situated in all these hierarchies, and what I can do with dance. Also, what kind of dance, the dance that I studied, do everybody have access to it, to the reading of it, to this aesthetics, all of this, but also even practicalities. Can we do the same piece in Brussels and we do the same somewhere in South America or somewhere in North Africa or somewhere in Asia? Do we have all the same theaters? Do we have all the same way of dealing with audience? So for me, it was like a huge question. And of course, dance for me is the first element that provokes these questions and allows space to deal with it. And then, of course, comes choreography, where also the dance becomes a tool with other tools to work on these questions. So for me, dance, it is the knowledge. It's the closest knowledge to my body, and it's the knowledge where I can, through what I can actually question everything else.
Yeah. To finish, I think we're coming to the end point of this talk. And to finish, I would like to bring back one thing that you said in exchange that the two of us had recently. And then you said, I believe there's a link between our southern landscapes and the vibrations of our bodies, thoughts, and memories. So my question would be, how do you see the connection between landscape and choreography?
Uh-huh. So I think for me, and especially now, it's very nice that you bring that, Ricardo, now, and especially being here also in this lab in Australia, where there is a lot of talk about the land and what it holds. Also, we had a very beautiful encounter with people who have knowledge of plants. So for me, that's also part of this not lost knowledge, but this knowledge that it was somehow excluded in our dance studies or choreography, but also in a lot of aesthetics, that I wanted and they feel a need to link back to and to go back to. And it's also because the landscape and the ecosystems are also cultural environments. So for me, when you say the people of the mountain, there is people of the mountain everywhere. And people of the mountain, first, the inhabitant, the mountain itself, but this nature of this place also brings specific knowledge, brings specific cultural production. And of course, if you say, of course, people of the south or people of the north, the beautiful thing is that you can find people of the mountain in Morocco and people of the mountain in Spain, people of the mountain in Switzerland, and people of the mountain in somewhere in Asia or in Americas. So for me, that takes us to another level of connection, of course, to nature itself first, and then to what it makes out of us as humans, but also what it created through history, culturally, from the way of using the voice to what we eat and what we drink. So for me, that's what I mean by, of course, certain spaces make a specific kind of art, and in my case of dance, of choreography. But also, I think the land also, and these landscapes bring us back to the question of our environment, as simple as that, where we live, what surrounds us, what's the other nature surround us, how we take care of it, how we keep it alive in our works, in our poems, in our songs, in our everyday thinking and doing. So for me, it has been also in the trilogy, but also in Libya, this presence of these three spaces specifically because that's where my people lives as well, the mountain and the sea. It's very present in this work, and actually it's gonna be present again in my coming works. And this is something, it's also, I think, with all the also ecological catastrophe and everything, more and more you also feel you have to care of these spaces, not only care about them, not only by leaving them or by to put them in a museum, like almost like to not touch them, but how actually to touch them and to work through them, through this knowledge, and how to keep them alive with us without, so it's not a binary, or we have to leave all the nature to keep it alive, or we have to destroy it. I think there is for me, another way to deal with nature, that it's not only being exclusive and say, okay, it have to become a reserve or like a park where no one go in, because that's how the only way we can keep it. So this is the question of landscaping in the work, but also in how I relate to people I invite or people I share with ideas and emotions and memories and imagination. I think it's a big part of that.
Yeah, thanks a lot for sharing all this and for being here with us. And I hope to see you soon in Berlin.